Hello, I'm Amartya Sen. I teach economics and philosophy at Harvard University. I had the misfortune, though rather educational, opportunity of having cancer many years ago when I was 18. It was an oral cancer on the hard palate. I gathered from the medical papers at that time that I was thought to have a 15% chance of living up to 5 years. So since that was 65 years ago, I'm reasonably comfortable about it by now, at the age of 83. But it was quite a trying experience, even though it not only generated a successful outcome in curing me of a cancer which killed so many people, especially in my part of the world, but also making me deeply interested both in the science of the disease as well as what we can do in order to make the hold of the disease far less gripping than it is at this time. When I reflect on my experience, I think probably the most difficult time that I had was before the diagnosis. I had something in my mouth that didn't look to me right, but I had great difficulty in persuading my general doctor to take any interest in it. And I had to go, I went to 3 different hospitals in trying to get some kind of a diagnosis. Eventually, happily, there had been a newly set up cancer hospital in Calcutta, where I was then. It was set up only a few years earlier. I'm talking about 1952, when I went there, and I insisted, I knew somebody there, and I insisted that he should do a biopsy, because I had persuaded myself by reading books that I had succeeded in getting from another person staying in the same hostel in YMCA, who was a medical student. I had looked at some books, and I was getting pretty convinced that I had cancer, and possibly squamous cell carcinoma, which actually proved to be the case. I think the biggest challenge, at least one of the big challenges that a patient has to overcome, is to be diagnosed correctly and early. Then there is the question of seeking treatment and going to the right place, because there's so much mythology about cancer, and yet there's so much knowledge and so much science and so much effective engineering on that too. I think from the point of view of that, linking up the two, general knowledge of cancer, since it's such a common kind of cancer in some parts of the world. In India and South Asia, it's very common indeed, the commonest form of cancer. So I think it's very important to get early diagnosis, get early treatment, and also along with that, and that's a longer horizon, is for the community both to spread the knowledge as well as taking the preventive steps that are needed in order to make the hold of this cancer less strong and less common than it is today. The science of treating cancer, of course, is changing. When I had my treatment in 1952, what I had was a radium mold, which was held in a lead case, which I had to put in my mouth and hold still for 8 hours a day. And that went on for 8 days together, generating an 8,000 rad blast of radiation, which of course had the effect of killing the cancer. It also killed a lot else, namely the palate tissue behind it. I had necrosis. And so that's a long struggle. But it was an immediate struggle to sit still on a rickety chair for 8 hours a day when someone is as young as 18, and do it for 8 days without thinking about whether this is going to cure you or not cure you. So all that is really quite serious. But one thought was very much in my mind at that time, since I was interested in science very, very much indeed, that but for the research, foundational research that was done by Madame Curie and others across the world, I would have been finished now, more than 50 years ago. And it's remarkable that at that time that generated a sense of hope that there is science and I could rely on it. And now, of course, science has moved a lot further forward. If I had that cancer today, I would be treated very differently. But it's as important to recognize the contribution of science as to recognize how that science could be converted into easy delivery on the basis of diagnosis across the world. And this is really one of the thoughts that did occupy me even when I was worrying about my own life. There was good to think about the general challenge of cancer, of which I was only a small part. I feel very honored to have the opportunity of participating in the World Head and Neck Cancer Awareness Day, which is a big thing because awareness is very central to treating cancer, to winning over it, rather than being defeated by it. It's also very important to get the patient's point of view registered there so that the control goes also with concern about the issue of pain, the issue of suffering, which are very important. But they're very important both because pain is a terrible thing to have, but also because you don't want the patient to become disheartened. There has to be a sense of the patient being in the driver's seat and in control. And awareness is part of that story also.